got Dana Larsen joining us. He's an advocate for legalization and decriminalization of drugs. Dana, why don't you introduce yourself? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to participate. And I've been working in drug policy reform and cannabis activism for pretty much all of my adult life. And I'm a big advocate of civil disobedience and of, although I think it takes people working from all angles to make real change happen, I think that in Canada especially, breaking the laws and trying to create the situation and the place that you want to exist in is the best way to get there. And if we look at how cannabis was legalized and how those changes came in Canada, I think a necessary prerequisite for legalization to happen was the existence of hundreds of shops across the country ignoring the law, selling cannabis, getting busted, having hassles, having things happen, but by and large, a thriving, above ground, civilly disobedient, yet hopefully responsible movement is integral to making this kind of stuff successful. And I think that we're going to see a parallel, but different in some ways, but ultimately a parallel kind of movement happening with psychedelics and entheogens, and hopefully also happening with things like heroin as well, and the creation of heroin buyers clubs and groups like that across Canada to really come at the war on drug users from all angles and dismantle it ourselves, and then let the politicians and the system fill in afterwards. So that's what I'm all about.
And so if you were to relate kind of, I love it. Freedom, essentially, right? Cognitive liberty.
I mean, this strategy of civil disobedience.
If you were to relate what happened with cannabis and what's happening with psychedelics right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that, psychedelics.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What do you.
To me, where psychedelics and entheogens are now is where cannabis was 25 years ago, right? We had the Section 56 exemptions cracking the door open for just one or two medical cannabis users back at that time. Ultimately, a crack that we pushed open, and we had thousands and thousands of Canadians coming through and accessing medicinal cannabis. And ultimately, that forced the government to create a medical system as flawed as it was. And then we went back to court and fought it and opened compassion clubs and then dispensaries all across Canada. And I think we're going to see a similar thing with entheogens and psilocybin and ketamine and LSD and things like that. I think that we're already seeing this underground, but starting to come above ground formation of therapy places. People can come and take Ibogaine or take other substances. And there's a lot of them out there, and they're starting to get more open and more confident in having names attached to it and in going more public. So that really parallels the cannabis movement in a lot of ways. And also I think the recognition that you start with the focus on medicalization and the medical benefits of these substances, because it transforms the face of the user from sort of a hedonist person who just wants to get high because they want to have fun or recreationally, to this idea that people are using these for medicinal purposes to benefit themselves. And then you start to see that all use is really medicinal in many ways. And that goes for entheogens as well as for cannabis, or at least there's a medical aspect to all use of these substances. And so it changes people's perceptions of it. And I think that we're at the stage now, we've got enough good lawyers and strength in the courts, and the Section 56 exemptions being given out opens the door up for sellers and providers and therapeutic places to use that as a defense, because it's a great precedent. People are legally allowed to access this substance, but there's no legal source to get it from. And that creates an opening for mushroom dispensaries in the same way that it did for cannabis dispensaries. And so, I opened Canada's first mail order microdose dispensary with somebody's name attached to it. Plenty of other people are doing this already and providing wonderful benefits. The only real difference with what I did is that I said, I'm Dana Larsen and I'm doing this openly. And for a lot of customers, that means a lot, because although there's a lot of great sources on the internet that will provide quality products, they feel more comfortable with somebody whose face they know and who they recognize. And I think that hopefully people are going, well, Dana's been doing this for a year now and he didn't get busted. Nothing happened to him yet. And maybe I could do this too, and they'll gain some confidence from my situation. Not that I'm immune from getting arrested or anything like that, but the fact that microdoses are extremely small quantities, and that there's a lot of evidence in court cases around this, and that, I think that even in a case where there was some kind of a raid or an arrest, I feel pretty confident that no judge in Canada is going to put me or anybody else into jail for any kind of serious length of time for providing microdoses to people who have got some kind of medical need. And so, I always tell people who want to get involved in civil disobedience in this movement to think of the worst case scenario of what they're trying to do. And if they can live with that, then go forward and be confident that if things go bad, you've accepted that. And in many places in the world, the worst case scenario is a lifetime in prison or execution or, terrible things happening to you. And in Canada, at this time, if you do it right, the worst case scenarios are really mostly financial loss, that they might come after your stock or come after your money or have to pay a lot of money on lawyers and go to court. But those risks aren't really that great compared to the benefits that you can provide to your community and to the country by providing access to these things. And, the mushroom business or psychedelic business and cannabis are different in many ways, because cannabis users use a lot more cannabis than psychedelic and entheogen users do, right? And so in terms of a business model, it's a different kind of a model. And I'm often encouraging people who buy my microdoses to only take it for a limited time and then to take a break for a while, and maybe they don't need them anymore. That the goal ultimately is to not have to use them on a regular basis, which is kind of a bad business model, but a great model for helping people make great changes to their lives. So you've got to sort of look at it differently, but there's a lot of parallels.
So with cannabis legalization, it was legalization first, right? That was the big motive. With psychedelics, oftentimes it seems like decriminalization or medicalization are coming first. And for example, we just saw Vancouver City Council bring forward a motion, I think it was last week, for the government of Canada to federally decriminalize all drugs. Do you want to maybe just provide some input or feedback on that announcement and how you feel about that moving forward?
Well, I'm glad they're saying that, and certainly it's better than a city calling for more penalties, and like in Alberta, where the federal government or the provincial government in Alberta is very hostile even to harm reduction and even to injection sites. But the reality is Vancouver has a ton of power they're not using in this instance. Vancouver could license heroin buyers clubs and psychedelic dispensaries and things if they wanted to. They absolutely have that power. And I know that because we had a court case fighting against Vancouver in regards to our cannabis dispensary, saying they don't have the right to regulate us because we're breaking the law, and they only have to arrest us or leave us alone, but they can't regulate us. This was a case from a few years ago in kind of a different context, but the court decision that came down, the judge affirmed that cities have the right to license and regulate illegal businesses, even if they're violating federal law, that they had the right to license cannabis dispensaries, even when we were under federal law, and that to zone and create bylaws and charge us business license fees. So they have the power in Vancouver City Hall to create a heroin buyers club and make safe supply happen. And they have the power to direct the police a lot more than they do as well. And at the provincial level, John Horgan and the BC NDP, they've also said some good things about decriminalization, but they have the power in British Columbia also, in any province, to tell the police to stop arresting people, stop harassing people, stop taking away drugs. Dr. Bonnie Henry here in British Columbia, our chief health officer, has come out and explained how British Columbia could decriminalize possession. And really, it's not decriminalizing drugs. It's decriminalizing drug users is what we really want to have happen. But so they all have a lot more power, and they have that same power when it comes to entheogens and psychedelics as well. Vancouver or any city could do a lot. But I'm glad they're calling on the feds to take action on decriminalizing all drugs. The problem, I guess, the other issue I have is that they don't really define what decriminalization means. And so the police will say, well, it's decriminalized now. We don't charge anybody for possession, or very, very rarely, but they do harass drug users. They take away their drugs, and not so much for mushroom users, but if you're a heroin user and they take away your heroin, you got to go buy some more pretty quick, and that causes a lot of problems that come out of that wouldn't be there if they just let you keep your stash. So But Vancouver City Council, there was that motion when I talked about opening my mushroom dispensary to shut it down and not allow that happen. And the Vancouver City Councilors, all of them except for one, like kind of laughed at that motion that was brought forward, and they all voted it down and said that they didn't consider mushroom dispensaries a problem in the city, which I think was wonderful. And they didn't put rules in place to make it happen. But they did indicate that for them, someone like me or someone else opening a mushroom type dispensary in Vancouver was not going to become a big focus for them on enforcement.
Fair enough. Gonna switch over to some audience questions here. So if anyone from the audience has a question for Dana, feel free to pop it in there now. And then we have another 15-minute segment with Pepe Rivera and Guarav after that. So Dana, Kaylee is asking, do you have any advice for First Nations trying to get into psilocybin in Canada?
Well, I think there's a lot of possibilities there. And in fact, the biggest number of cannabis dispensaries right now are on Indigenous land. In Toronto, in Ontario especially, there's a lot of fairly small reserves and communities that have a lot of cannabis dispensaries, and they've kind of got that in place where they also sell tobacco and other stuff. So they kind of used to that form of sort of civil disobedience and flexing their rights on their own land. So I think there's a lot of potential there for cannabis access as well. If you've got an area that's somewhat accessible, but also kind of open, and that I would consider making a place people can come and have psychedelic experiences in a therapeutic setting. There's a huge demand for that. If you did it openly or got attention for it, people would come from all over the world to have a mushroom trip or an ibogaine trip or peyote or whatever, but in some kind of ceremonial setting or in a one-on-one kind of setting in a therapeutic way. That is happening, but it's huge potential. And I said, depending, if you got to be somewhere where it's somewhere accessible people to get to, but I think that's something that could be done on First Nations or reserve land, and it would be successful anywhere, but there especially, I think you could kind of get away with more things and have less likely to see enforcement come after you.